Olá, sejam bem-vindos. Bom, eu acho que é a primeira vez que vocês me veem de headset e tem um motivo especial para isso. Eu preparei meio que um review sobre um tema chamado Astrobiologia. Eu tomei como ponto de partida esse livrinho aqui chamado Astrobiologia, uma ciência emergente, de vários autores, dentre eles meu orientador de mestrado, o Douglas Galante. Esse livro é o único livro assim que eu vou trazer, provavelmente seja o único que eu irei trazer em Kindle, porque ele é de graça, tá? Então eu vou deixar o link na descrição. E a gente vai fazer um breve review assim de algumas teorias propostas para a emergência da vida na Terra, algumas condições da Terra primitiva, e com a autorização da USP, eu postarei também uma palestra dada por um pesquisador chamado Michael Russell em 2019. Eu tive essa grande oportunidade de ter essa palestra com ele. Ele é talvez o pesquisador mais renomado nessa área de astrobiologia. Ele formulou uma teoria chamada teoria de fontes hidrotermais para a origem da vida, a qual é muito proeminente e a qual é também meu tema de pesquisa. Então, assim, acho que valerá a pena. E lembrando também que a palestra será postada com autorização do Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP. Espero que vocês aproveitem o vídeo. Bom, agora a gente vai para os slides. Vou desligar minha câmera e até daqui a pouco. Eu queria dar um overview, né, geral nas nossas atuais teorias sobre como a vida emergiu no planeta Terra, a vida como a gente conhece, né, após um longo processo evolutivo. Lembrando que a gente está falando aqui de 4,4 bilhões de anos, né? Há 4,5, 4,4 bilhões de anos isso aconteceu, né? Então, essa imagem ela resume muito bem o que de fato pode ter levado à emergência da vida na Terra, por assim dizer. Em resumo, a gente tem 6 teorias principais. A primeira delas seria lagoas primordiais, por assim dizer. Eu já vou falar um pouquinho mais sobre elas. A segunda seria a panspermia ou neopanspermia, a hipótese de que a vida veio do espaço, através de cometas, meteoritos. Uma terceira hipótese seria que a vida teria sido originada em Marte e só depois ter vindo para a Terra. Uma quarta hipótese, talvez a mais promissora de todas, é que as células, as protocélulas, tenham sido originadas em ambientes marítimos, mais em específicos em falhas mesoatlânticas, tá? Porque essas falhas têm suas particularidades, suas composições químicas distintas, possuem gradientes químicos, membranas que geram uma diferença de pH, enfim. Então, essas teorias de hidrotermais, por assim dizer, de fontes hidrotermais, de falhas mesodorsais, elas são teorias muito em voga ultimamente, talvez seja a resposta para como a vida emergiu na Terra primitiva. Lembrando sempre que a gente está falando de um período de 4,4 bilhões de anos, tá? A gente tem ali hipóteses sobre ilhas de vulcões arcaicos, mas isso está meio em desuso, certo? E algumas novas hipóteses relacionadas a geysers nucleares que permitiriam a fissão nuclear de alguns elementos, aliás, de algumas moléculas que levariam à formação de alguns elementos. Esses elementos se juntariam e formariam outras moléculas orgânicas e assim por diante, tá? Esse é o overview geral. Eu vou falar um pouquinho de cada uma delas, certo? Bom, em relação à teoria da pequena lagoa tépida, né? Ela foi uma teoria proposta por Darwin, isso já em 1800, né? Então, você teria um ambiente rico em ácido fosfórico, amônia, luz, calor, eletricidade. Aqui a gente tem o famoso experimento de Miller, que a gente viu lá no ensino médio, dos coacervados, dos aminoácidos em solução, né? Contudo, essa teoria ela tem um pequeno, digamos assim, uma pequena inconsistência. A atmosfera assumida nessa teoria é uma atmosfera oxidante e não redutora, coisa que não é corroborada por dados atuais. Já falando um pouquinho da panspermia e neopanspermia, dando uma ênfase à neopanspermia, né? É uma proposta que afirma que compostos como etileno, etilenglicol, cianamidas, ureia, acetaldeídos, fofídeos, em especial, né, foram entregues à atmosfera por meteoritos. E a partir de bombardeamento, uma imensa troca de materiais extraterrestres, tá? Esses compostos teriam se auto-organizado de alguma maneira e formado moléculas orgânicas mais complexas. Curiosamente, tanto a panspermia ela já, digamos assim, ela foi deixada de lado e passou a se chamar de neopanspermia porque realmente tem evidências de matéria orgânica em meteoritos, correto? Então, sim, é uma alternativa viável e ainda em estudo. Já falando sobre a origem marciana, recentemente também, através de meteoritos provindos de Marte, a gente tem a presença de compostos orgânicos, de bioassinaturas, por assim dizer. Além de que Marte é um ambiente muito propício para ter sido habitado há alguns milhões de anos. E a procura por vida marciana, a procura por bioassinaturas, por qualquer tipo de molécula de resquício de organismos, de fósseis, enfim, ela é uma busca muito intensa. Então, sim, uma teoria muito razoável é que a vida tenha sido originada em Marte e de alguma forma tenha sido extinta em um certo período de tempo, mas antes dessa extinção ter sido entregue à Terra por meio de, enfim, de meteoritos, por meio de impactos da superfície marciana com a Terra em si. Já falando das fontes hidrotermais, tá? Elas têm um espaço muito, mas muito importante na nossa perspectiva de origem da vida. E, na verdade, é a teoria que eu trabalho, correto? Por quê? Porque, primeiro que fontes hidrotermais, elas foram teorizadas, pelo menos as alcalinas, ou seja, com pH muito, mas muito básico, antes de suas descobertas, tá? E elas proporcionam um ambiente muito, digamos, adequado à emergência da vida, tá? E além de tudo, os organismos que a gente encontra em fontes hidrotermais atuais são organismos muito, mas muito próximos às raízes filogenéticas da vida, ou seja, próximos aos domínios arqueia e eubactéria. Então, de certa forma, uma boa hipótese é que a vida tenha sido originada em fontes hidrotermais. Isso eu vou explicar um pouquinho no próximo slide. Mas, se você tiver interesse, tá aí as referências, né? Só para terminar aqui, a questão de arcos vulcânicos, né, ilhas vulcânicas, é a proposição de que a vida tenha sido formada por meio de uma interação entre sítios vulcânicos, onde a gente teria potássio, zinco, manganês, fosfato em abundância, né? Todos esses elementos essenciais à vida, e de alguma forma, não vou entrar em detalhes, eles teriam se auto-organizados, e dado origem ao que a gente chama como vida moderna. Contudo, essas protocélulas, né, evoluídas em ambientes anóxidos, elas são, digamos assim, muito particulares, porque, olha, só pela imagem a gente já percebe que é um ambiente praticamente dantesco, né? Como que a gente poderia acomodar uma vida, uma célula, uma protocélula, uma membrana, alguma coisa biológica em um ambiente tão hostil? Fica aí o questionamento, né? Mas ainda há pesquisa em relação a isso, é uma área de interesse, e fica aí a sugestão. Outra sugestão é justamente os geysers nucleares, tá? Que proporciona uma radiação ionizante, proveniente do processo de fissão nuclear. Essa fissão, consequentemente, rompe moléculas de nitrogênio, CO2, moléculas de água e outros compostos orgânicos, os quais levam à formação de outros compostos orgânicos necessários e comuns a organismos primitivos. Sim, geysers nucleares existem, na realidade eles existem várias pesquisas em relação a isso, tá? Principalmente em questão de isótopos e isóbaros, enfim, e é também uma teoria muito promissora. Mas dentre essas 6 apresentadas, eu digo que a mais promissora seria a de fontes hidrotermais. Bom, mas assim, tirando esse overview geral, como que a Terra era há 4,4 bilhões de anos, né? Bom, essa foto foi de um artigo do Russell, que eu já vou apresentar para vocês depois. E a gente pode assumir que o Adiano, né, o período onde a vida tenha sido originada, a gente tinha uma atmosfera rica em CO2, nitrogênio, enxofre, CO, né? Um oceano altamente carbônico, ou seja, o CO2 todo presente na atmosfera era dissolvido em água, tá? Formando ácido carbônico. Então a gente tinha um pH ali levemente ácido, correto? E abaixo desse leito marítimo, a gente teria o processo de serpentinização, processo muito, mas muito conhecido já, o qual liberaria hidrogênio, metano e principalmente OH hidroxila, tá? E lembrando que se a gente tem um ambiente exterior ácido e um ambiente anterior alcalino, ou seja, com pH básico, essa diferença de pH proporciona um gradiente eletroquímico de forma a proporcionar redução a qual leva à formação de compostos orgânicos. Tanto a redução direta, por exemplo, de CO2, tá? Para a formação de metano, etano, moléculas mais complexas, quanto a redução e ativação de catalisadores, né? Então, isso seria uma hipótese muito, mas muito, muito viável, a hipótese de fontes hidrotermais alcalinas. Mas, em resumo, essa foto resume muito bem o que seria o oceano primitivo, tá? A gente teria ferro, níquel, manganês, zinco, tudo misturado no oceano, tá? Essa tem uma temperatura média, a temperatura não é um consenso. Tem artigos que falam que a temperatura chegava entre 100 graus Celsius, outros 0 a 10, 0 a 50, abaixo do leito marítimo a 400, 500, mas com toda certeza a gente teríamos uma atmosfera rica em CO2. Talvez isso seja o mais importante, esse CO2 sendo dissolvido em um ambiente aquático, em um ambiente marítimo, rico em ferro rico em níquel. Tanto níquel quanto ferro podem ter atuado como catalisadores para moléculas mais complexas, claro, com a ajuda do CO2, com a ajuda do hidrogênio, né, que até mesmo o hidrogênio é uma molécula redutora desses metais, né? Mas devido às limitações de temperaturas, enfim. Mas isso são outras questões que ficam em aberto para quem quiser dar uma procurada ou quiser tirar alguma dúvida em si. Mas o curioso disso é que esses mesmos ambientes teorizados por Russell já na década de 80, eles foram encontrados recentemente, na verdade em 2001, 2002, em sítios hidrotermais chamados, como da foto à direita, de Lost City, tá? Sítios hidrotermais formados majoritariamente por carbonato de cálcio e óxido de magnésio, tá? Os quais exalam OH-, então eles têm um pH dentro dessas estruturas, eles têm um pH muito, mas muito básico, e para fora um pH levemente ácido, que proporciona um gradiente eletroquímico, ou até mesmo um processo de catálise, tá? Só fazendo um adendo aqui, esse pH oceânico, ele também não é um consenso, tá? Aqui a gente está aproximadamente falando de um pH, uma diferença de pH da ordem de 5, tá? Mas essa diferença pode ter sido menor, correto? Talvez o pH do oceano primitivo possa ter alcançado ali sua escala de 6.2, 6.6, o que flexibiliza ainda mais essa teoria de fontes hidrotermais alcalinas. Perfeito? Bom, então vocês devem estar se perguntando, tá, mas e aí, como que a gente testa isso? Como que a gente vê isso em laboratório? E a resposta não é uma resposta fácil, tá? Os experimentos, eles ainda são rudimentares, eles ainda são muito arcaicos. São poucos grupos que trabalham com isso. A gente tem um grupo aqui no Brasil que trabalha com isso e eu faço parte. E uma forma de se estudar isso, uma forma muito, digamos assim, muito in situ mesmo, avaliar o que está acontecendo, os processos químicos, eletrodinâmicos que ocorrem durante essa formação de compostos orgânicos, é a utilização de síncrotron. Aqui eu tenho a foto à esquerda do Laboratório Nacional do Síncrotron. Ele é o laboratório onde eu trabalho, mas ele está desativado no momento, correto? Porque a gente mudou para o Sirius, um laboratório muito, mas muito maior, né? E a foto ao lado não faz parte da minha pesquisa, mas eu fiz algo semelhante. É uma tomografia, tá? É uma técnica de tomografia de uma simulação de uma chaminé que a gente pode obter aqui nesse slide, essas chaminés aqui à direita. A gente obteve uma chaminé semelhante a essa e a gente conseguiu realizar um estudo em 3D dela, medindo a porosidade, a capacidade de aderência de metais, a disponibilidade de poros, a disponibilidade de canais os quais passariam líquidos, fluidos hidrotermais, possibilitariam a catálise, enfim. Então, em resumo, a questão de como a vida emergiu na Terra primitiva agora é uma questão muito mais experimental do que teórica. Então, qualquer modelo, qualquer proposta experimental, ela é muito bem-vinda. E propostas envolvendo síncrotron, envolvendo técnicas de aquisição de medidas rápidas, são realmente úteis, né? Essa tomografia ela não foi feita em síncrotron, mas a gente pode facilmente não, mas a gente pode realmente fazer isso in situ, ou seja, ver a estrutura crescendo, ver como ela se comporta durante o crescimento e assim elaborar um modelo ainda mais promissor, por assim dizer, no caso de fontes hidrotermais. Bom, mas afinal de contas, o que é vida, né? Esse cara aí da foto à direita, o nome dele é Michael Russell. Eu tive a oportunidade de conversar com ele em 2019 e eu vou passar a palestra para vocês com autorização do Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, tá? E eu fiz exatamente essa pergunta: Hey, what is life, né? E ele respondeu com a seguinte frase: Life is a verb, not a noun. Ou seja, a vida não é um substantivo, né? Ela é um verbo. Então, se trata muito mais do que a vida é capaz de fazer, do que células são capazes de fazer. A funcionalidade de uma célula seria, na visão dele, o que diferenciaria um organismo vivo de um não vivo, correto? Bom, fica aí minha introdução a esse ramo fantástico da astrobiologia. Agora eu vou passar para vocês a palestra dele, dura cerca de 1 hora, mas vocês vão ter uma oportunidade única de assistir isso, porque eu confesso que eu não sei se está no YouTube, eu acredito que não, eu demorei para conseguir. E todo o crédito vai para a USP. E é isso, muito obrigado pela atenção, espero que vocês tenham aproveitado e meus mais sinceros agradecimentos.
Bem, bom dia a todos. Bem-vindos todos. Nós estamos ao vivo, www.iea.usp.br/ao vivo e gravando. Perguntas deverão ser feitas ao microfone com identificação da pessoa. Coloquem os seus celulares no modo silencioso, por favor. Ao público online, as perguntas podem ser enviadas para iearesponde@usp.br. iearesponde@usp.br. O vídeo e as fotos estarão disponíveis na mediateca do IEA, www.iea.usp.br/mediateca, ou no canal do YouTube dentro de 10 dias úteis. Esses são os nossos avisos preliminares. Bem-vindos todos. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to USP in this beautiful, cloudy, or maybe sunny day. I'm Ana Paula Magalhães, and I'm assessor in the Research Provost Office, which I represent today. I'm also a professor in the Medieval History Chair here at USP. In the name of the Research Provost, Professor Silvio Canuto, I'm pleased to welcome all the fellow researchers from all over the world. I compliment the present authorities in the name of Professor Emanuel from IKISC, but as well important, my congratulations to the organization of this seminar, Professor Hamilton Varela, Professor Vivian Pelizari, and Professor Douglas Galante here with me. USP has a settled tradition of collaboration with universities and research institutes around the world. And this has been the basis of our high scores on scientific publications and on scientific development. We believe that research gets people close and favors cultural changes. Research is, beyond knowledge and scientific improvement, a part of this major value named manhood. excellence, responsibility, social purposes. Those have been the supports of the research that we practice here. I wish this workshop get our bounds tighter and increase our knowledge and our action in this important field of research. I hope you all have a very productive meeting. Greetings.
Well, thank you very much, Ana Paula. My name is Douglas Galante. I'm a researcher of the Brazilian Synchrotron Light Laboratory in Campinas, and also part of the research unit in astrobiology, NAP Astrobio, from here at the University of São Paulo, where I was graduated. And first of all, I would like to thank all the support given by the provost for the organization of this event, for the fantastic lecturers who accepted our invitation to come here, and for you, the public, to participate. And I would like to stress the idea of the strategic workshops is to really have an interaction with the public and to have an open discussion. So our idea, and I would like to stress, field of the origin of life in Brazil and at the University of São Paulo. So please interact, please interrupt us at any time we have time to discuss. It is our idea to have the feedback, even from online. So it will be a pleasure to receive all the questions, all comments, all critics, please. Please do. So we're going to open the sessions. We have 3 sessions for today, and we're going to start with prebiotic chemistry, and then move to very ancient life and paleobiology, and then move to the space and to the future to seek for life elsewhere and astrobiology. So our idea is to move from the very small to the very big. Let's see how it goes. I think we're going to have fun. I think we can start without further delays. I would like to invite for this first session, Professor Dimas Zaya from the State University of Londrina, who will be the chair of the session. Thank you very much, Professor.
Good morning. My name is Dimas Zaya. I am a professor from Londrina State University, Chemistry Department. I would like to thank you to Douglas Galante, Hamilton Varela, and Vivian Pelizari for organizing this workshop. I also would like to thank you, Tiago Altair. It was my angel, helping me a lot. Okay. And also I would like to thank you, Instituto de Estudos Avançados da USP, for this workshop. Today, I will be sharing this session, and we have 3 talks. One from Professor Michael Russell, one by myself, and another one from Professor Teresa Souza. I will read now a very resume de Professor Russell. Okay. Professor Russell works at the Planetary Chemistry and the Astrobiology Section Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He acquired his degree in science at the University of London in 1963, and in 1973, Dr. Russell earned his PhD in geochemistry and geology at the University of Durham, England. He has several honors, awards. I will read only 3. Only 3. NASA Exceptional Scientific Achievement Medal, 2018, 2016 GPL Discover Award, and the 2015 NASA Honor Group Award, Ice World, and 2009 William Smith Medal Geological Society for contribution to applied geology. Okay, I read 4, not 3. He delivered several publications, and I will, only one here I will read. In this year, or in honor of Professor Russell, for his 18th birthday, was a meeting in alkaline vents, okay, in Granada, Spain. Professor Russell published over 160 articles, and these articles have received over 4,400 citations. His more outstanding contribution was the submarine alkaline theory for emergence of life. Dr. Russell's lecture today will be about hydrothermal vents and the origin of life. Professor Russell, please. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Sit down. What happens next? Do I get a show here? Thank you. Oh, do I sit here? Okay, sorry. Should I sit here then?
If one to stand up a bit, if you want to walk out a little bit.
I just want to get the slide up. Well, good morning, everybody. I hope some of you were here yesterday because this is really for the workshop. And so as I've said earlier, please interrupt as you like. So I thought I'd just start with what I think are the initial conditions for the emergence of life. Now, if you're a physicist, you would never think of doing anything without understanding the initial conditions. But somehow or other, astrobiology doesn't seem to worry about that too much. Can't you hear me? Sorry. Do I have to do that again? I'm not used to this, sorry. I'm worrying about the initial conditions and how few people in astrobiology bother about the initial conditions of life. Now, a physicist would never think of doing anything without initial conditions, but we seem to take life too seriously. And I don't mean that in an ironic way. I mean that we think that it's about us and therefore how do we come to be? But actually it's about the universe and how we are an emergent structure of the universe. And I talk about us because we are quite a good example of life. We have, for example, iron, hemoglobin and so forth, and I think iron was important at the emergence of life. So what I'm going to do, if you can all see these different pictures, is just talk you through how I see the initial conditions of life and how, in fact, it was kind of on our planet, it just had to happen. It was, you could say statistically, deterministically, that it would happen. That wouldn't be true of many planets, I wouldn't say. But it's, what it does is we all live off about 1/2 to 1 volt. So basically it's about electrons. So if you don't think about the electrons, then you can't really get started. We are electrical motors, basically, and I don't mean this kind of in a derisive sense. If you think about each cell, each bacterial cell uses 1 million to 1 billion electrons a second. So you've got to take account of where the electrons come from. This is not Lego. You don't just assemble life by organic molecules that come from space, because there's too much junk there, for example. But, of course, as I said yesterday, and I always want to emphasize, is what does life do? What is its job? Now, in fact, that's the way to look about how we actually try to understand things when we're very young. One of the things as I said yesterday, we realize that things seem just to happen, but somehow or other, mother or father puts on a switch and it all happens. You have to be plugged in. So we need life to be plugged in, because you need those 1 million to 1 billion electrons a second for each cell. So that's another way of thinking about it. This is kind of a serious business about the evolution of the universe, and we happen to be the most complex, but rather inefficient or not large entropy generators, except in our own world. Of course, I mean, one of the things we're facing is just how effective entropy generators we are. In other words, how much kind of broken material we keep on producing from things that were eventually particularly low entropy to start with. So if we just start with this picture, and please interrupt if you don't understand. I'm going to sit down, it's easier, I guess. So here's the very earliest Earth that we know of, from about 3.85 billion years ago. Now there's a little bit of information before that from things like various isotopes. But I think one of the things I'm keen to say is I don't like the term Hadean. because it's pejorative. It kind of carries the view that it was a hellish place to be. Actually, 4.4 billion years ago, the world was a water world. And it really was an aqueous planet. It was, and the depth of the ocean was probably 4 to 8 kilometers. There was no land. You might have had a very occasional volcano coming out of the surface, but there was no land. The Earth is spinning about, a day lasts by between 12 and 7 hours. 12 and 17 hours. It's, the UV radiation is coming in almost 10 times as strong as it is today. You wouldn't want to be in the sunlight in those times. So, so we can take out some of the ideas about the emergence of life. There was no Darwin's pond. I think Darwin had a wonderful idea of evolution, but he said it's too early. He said in 1860, it's too early to talk about the emergence of life. One may as well talk about the emergence of matter. Notice he used the word emergence, because we are an emergent structure. And I would plead with you to change your title to The Emergence of Life. Origin rather says, I wonder how we came to be. But emergence gives respect to the universe about why we are an emergent structure after 13.5 billion years. So here's our planet about 4.4 billion years ago, and there would be plenty of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Now, as I keep emphasizing, what life does is to hydrogenate carbon dioxide. It adds hydrogen from water. Somehow or other, that hydrogen is freed from water, and it reacts with carbon dioxide to make a small but ever continuous amount of organic molecules on the planet. In other words, just because there's organic molecules on Titan does not mean there was life on Titan. In fact, it probably means there was no life on Titan. We've got a small but ever continuous amount. Why do I say that about Titan? Because there's no electron acceptors. Because your electrons that you're coming in, I had breakfast. I had my breakfast, and now I've got to get rid of my electrons. There go some of them. That's some of my electrons going off in carbon dioxide. So I've got to get rid of the electrons. So I've got to think about that. So I need to breathe. Now, we all know I need to breathe oxygen. But in fact, all bacteria, overall, all life needs to breathe. Now, it might need nitric oxide or something like that, or nitrate. I think it's probably nitrate right at the beginning. But you need those electron acceptors. In other words, you need that material that will accept your electrons. An electron acceptor, an oxidant, if you like. So oxygen, CO2 actually is a mild oxidant. Nitric acid is almost as good as I will emphasize in later, is almost as good as oxygen. So perhaps we started the life with nitric acid coming from nitrogen and in the atmosphere, and CO2 being impacted by high UV such that you generate nitric oxide in the atmosphere. The nitric oxide dissolves into the ocean to make nitrate. So there is something to breathe there, nitrate. So that's going to be very significant. And it's got oxygen in it, NO3, not a bad amount. But we also need, of course, the reductants. Now, the world cannot help giving you reductants. Every time the water of the Earth interacts with rock, you generate hydrogen. So all these hot springs you've ever heard of, I think, just about have hydrogen. And some of you might have heard of, some of them in Turkey, for example, emit methane. So you've had these everlasting flames of methane burning in our atmosphere. So hydrogen is easy to get from the planet because it's very reduced. Hydrogen is electron rich. The center of the Earth and the entirety of the interior of the Earth is electron rich, whereas the outside of the Earth is electron poor. So it's almost like a cell right there. You've got electrons in the middle, to the edge, and then on the outside you've got oxidized outside. Now, what are those oxides? They are CO2. Probably an atmosphere, 10 atmospheres, maybe more. After all, Venus has 90 atmospheres of carbon dioxide, and it's our sister planet. So carbon dioxide automatically comes out of volcanoes. So there's the carbon dioxide, and that is, after all, the basis of life. The substrate of life is carbon dioxide. Everything you had for breakfast started out as carbon dioxide. So that gives you, so now we kind of get hold of what life's like. How would it emerge? Well, it emerges because there's such a disequilibrium between hydrogen coming out of the planet and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the relatively oxidized atmosphere, with H2O as well. Relatively oxidized. So We're going from reduced to oxidized, or electron-rich to electron-poor. So I think that's the way. So that's a disequilibrium, and you know that the planet doesn't like disequilibrium. We don't like it ourselves. We get stressed out because there's so much disequilibrium in our lives. But that's what drives us. Actually, it's the disequilibrium that always drives us. That's what we should think about when we think about thermodynamics. We should think about disequilibrium. Disequilibrium all the time. And then if we walk around our lives and think about our lives day to day, then of course it's about disequilibrium. And actually it's the things that you really love are far from equilibrium. You love those big waterfalls. And so long as the cyclone's far enough away, you love to watch it. We are primed for disequilibrium. So the disequilibrium is between the interior of the Earth, which is electron-rich, and the exterior of the Earth, which is electron-poor. So now, many people think it's just a matter of chemistry. We could just solve the origin of life with chemistry. No, it's not chemistry. It's not chemistry. If it were chemistry, we wouldn't need life because the hydrogen would react with CO2 and reduce it to organic molecules anyway. But it doesn't. It's too hard. We know in our labs that it's very hard to produce CO2. We're desperate to try to do that because of the oncoming problems of the global climate change and so forth. We know it's too difficult. And that's why there's life, because it's so difficult to reduce carbon dioxide with hydrogen that life actually has kind of found the trick of how to do that. Now, what is that trick? It's got various tricks, and a lot of it's about physics. So let's have this is the way I see and I might just stick to this slide the whole time if we like, it's up to you. But so here we've basically got something called serpentinization. It's the only geological word you really need to know. Serpentinization. How does serpentinite form? There's plenty of serpentinite in Brazil, just about. You really can't hear me? Okay. Don't you have one you can put around your neck? No, I didn't mean to do that. So here's our early Earth. And it's an aqueous ocean. We've got something called serpentinization down here, which is what happens is if you have ocean floor and the water interacts with ocean floor, which it can't help doing, it falls down through the cracks, it oxidizes the ocean floor, and it oxidizes it with water. So it leaves hydrogen over. So serpentinization always produces hydrogen. Now, hydrogen, so that's our hydrogen, okay? But how does this happen? And it's happened since 4.4 billion years ago. It's always happening. Why? Because serpentinization is an engine. Okay, so really what we think about life is all about engines. So, in fact, the whole universe is an engine. A black hole is an engine for the galaxy. Convection is an energy for thermal heating, for example. Convection. That's the way physics solves thermal disequilibria. So, but the chemical disequilibria is generated by physics. And that's a kind of chemical disequilibria, but as we hear, it's not soluble by chemistry itself. So how we look at the initial conditions. So we've got serpentinization, we've got an engine. I can go into how that engine works, but I don't have much time. So the hydrogen is produced at the surface at a vent on the sea floor. And the vent will automatically be alkaline because of serpentinization. I guess this is the whole point, is it? I'm supposed to be looking at this. Okay. So here we are, 4.4 billion years ago. We're in Neptune's empire. It's a water world, no continents. The hydrogen is coming up, but there are very hot springs as well. You've all heard of black smokers, I think. And those black smokers are bringing much iron, a lot of iron to the surface, tens of millimoles of iron to the surface. But they don't precipitate as black smoke on the early Earth. It goes into solution. So the whole ocean is a reservoir of iron. So we've got iron, soluble in that early ocean. Can I just talk out loud? Can you hear me at the back? Because of the transmission to the internet. So there's a lot of iron in the ocean. 10 millimoles, or maybe more than 10 millimoles in the ocean. It stays soluble in the ocean because the ocean itself is somewhat acidic. So the iron is kind of nicely happy in the ocean as soluble. Sorry, I'm finding this extremely difficult with this microphone. I've never had to do this before.
I vote for you, okay?
No, that's even worse. You might propose. Okay. So the iron actually only precipitates on meeting. Has he got one? Has he got a?
Colocar ali do lado, na cadeira próximo, perto dele, talvez dê.
No, I don't want to do that. That's okay.
No.
It's, I just thought you'd have one that's automatic around your neck. Even pop singers don't sing with this anymore that much, unless they're making love to the microphone. Okay, doesn't matter. Right, I'm sorry about this. I really am not used to this. So, I'm a human being. I like to be kind of wired in rather than. So, the iron is in the ocean, and there's nothing to precipitate the iron to start with because there's no oxygen to make iron oxides. And the iron only precipitates when it meets an alkaline solution. Now, the alkaline solution is being produced by alkaline hot springs in the early ocean. Now, one thing one can say about this hypothesis is that it actually predicted this lost city, which was found about 20 years ago now, which is an alkaline spring in the early ocean, pH of about 10 or 11, and it's got a temperature of about 100 degrees. So it's very nicely buffered in both temperature and pH, and it's got hydrogen in it. What happens is, as soon as the iron in the ocean meets the alkaline spring, then immediately you precipitate what's called white rust. White rust is, we have it here on the left, it's FeOH twice. So it's basically soluble iron that precipitates very quickly as soon as an alkaline fluid is reached. So we get a precipitate. So we get a kind of frustrating barrier between, yes please, it's frustrating, there's a frustrating barrier. Okay, so let's get back to thank you. So I get rid of one frustrating barrier, and now I can talk sensibly about another frustrating barrier. Right, you do it. So anyway, that was an example of frustration. And I don't mean that lightly. Beethoven was deaf and Monet was blind. Think about frustration. Think about creativity. Creativity only happens in frustration. Okay, that's true for our own lives. Dostoevsky knew all about that. Read books. Young people, read books. So here we are with a frustrating precipitate of ferrous oxyhydroxide. Okay, so first of all it's white rust, and immediately that turns into something called green rust. Now you're all aware of rust because rust is what happens to the bridges. However hard they try, the bridges always go rusty. If you go carefully through that rust, you'll find between the iron in the bridge and the red rust, there is something called green rust. Now the early Earth precipitated white rust, and that turned into green rust almost immediately. Now, green rust is a little more complicated. It's got a mixture of ferric and ferrous iron. So there's a mixture of valency. So here we are with the green rust. It's a ferric oxyhydroxide. It's got water in it. Now, here's a mineral that actually has water in it. Now, most minerals do not have water in them. Now, life has water in it. That's not a bad start for life. If you're going to want to think about water, proteins have water. The idea that we have to be dry to make a life is just ludicrous. We are wet. So we're not a dried up pool. We come from something really strong and dynamic, from an alkaline spring. And the two solutions are mixing. You've got hydrogen on the inside, methane on the inside. They're coming up. They're precipitating this frustrating barrier made basically of green rust. Okay, ferrous oxyhydroxide, green rust with water molecules in them. And it's a layered mineral. I'm going to hope I get around to showing you that it's a layered mineral and water is trapped in it. And because of the ferric state of some of the iron, it requires an anion. It requires something like carbonate or chloride or sulfate or phosphate to come into it. Now, we all know that that's quite nice. We like to have phosphate and chloride in us. So, yeah, I'll make that, because we're short, I'm going to make it, let's use us as the analogy of life. So, and of course, one good thing about, oh, God. One good thing about this is that it's like your hemoglobin. It can go from dark red to light red, so to speak, or from green to stronger green, as the changes from ferrous to ferric and back again. So here we've got a mineral that's actually rather like hemoglobin already. So in other words, now if you're in the initial conditions, and we know that life has got to start because of the disequilibrium between hydrogen and carbon dioxide, how could it be that life starts like that unless there was material around to use? So we need stuff that's actually there in a kind of junkyard, if you like, that could be used and make into engines. Now, green rust actually makes, to my mind, a wonderful engine. So here's the initial conditions. What do I need? I need this equilibrium. Okay, thermodynamically, I'm going to call that free energy. I'm uneasy about the word free energy. By the way, people like Boltzmann and Schrödinger and all those great people that we all respect. I'm just trying to think of one more. They said the idea of energy is ludicrous. It's nothing to do with energy. It's disequilibrium. It's always disequilibrium. It's all about the entropy part. It's the delta S. It's pulling, entropy is pulling the universe along. It's making it kind of more and more, if you think, complex, but only so it can break into ever smaller pieces, so to speak. So we've got to think, and we know that, by the way. We know how much mess we're making, and even the New York Times now tells us that actually we're making so much mess, we're in a climatic catastrophe or some such. That's entropy. That's what happens when you do very well at using free energy or disequilibrium and make the universe more relaxed. The universe, we might not think of it, but the universe is getting more relaxed because of what we do. So here's our free energy or disequilibrium, and here's the exhaust. You've got to have the exhaust. I'm going to run quickly to, there's two aspects about this, but do you see this I don't know if you see in Brazil, the Beverly Hills cops. Some of you might have seen them, have you? So you know how this guy gets away. Yeah, because, he's a sharp guy from Chicago. And he's dealing with Beverly Hills cops. It's people like Beckham used to live there. Sorry about that, but it's true. So they're in Los Angeles. And they're called kind of dumb cops, but Eddie, who knows what to do, and the cop's going to chase him. He knows that, so he goes into the store and he buys 2 bananas and sticks it up the exhaust. And off he goes, and of course they're stuck, because it's the exhaust that drives your car. It's the exhaust that drives your car. It's the exhaust that drives the universe. Okay, so that's the way to think about it. We're getting pulled that way. It's almost irresistible. That's why we're finding it so difficult to deal with climate change. It's so irresistible. Oh, there's still some oil. Oh, there's more coal. Oh, well, we better use it. I don't want to use it, but what would Australia do if we didn't have coal? So so let's get back to this. Well, there's the other quick one. I worked at JPL for NASA. So I thought, well, I would like to be a rocket scientist. This is as close as I got. This is how a rocket works, or can work. You can use methane and hydrogen as the fuel, okay, because you've got to have fuel. But you've got to have an oxidant. You can use flaming nitric acid as a fuel, okay? And what happens is, it's quite clear what happens is, it's the exhaust that drives the rocket. No doubt about it. So here's life. So here's the exhaust. Off it goes, looking for life elsewhere, because we realize now it's not going to come into us automatically. But it's not very different, the emergence of life. It's just in water, so we're trapped at 100 degrees centigrade or a little less. And up comes the hydrogen and methane from the alkaline vent. Here's nitrate in the ocean, that's the oxidant, same one as here. And this actually makes, through the engines, it makes up biomolecules which can do the job better than green rust, better and better and better. Very slow little steps to getting better and better and better at making more and more entropy by reducing the internal entropy all that time. And finally, you get the exhaust. And the exhaust is things like water, of course, always water, nitric oxide, probably acetate, and so forth. So the exhaust is automatic. You know, you have to go to the bathroom. You know, bañero, you just have to. You know, unfortunately, that's what's pulling your breakfast into you. So that's the way the system works. So let's get back to this, and I'll take any questions on this. But the nitric oxide, by the way, that's the important one. That's produced from lightning, from CO2 and nitrogen, to give you the nitric oxide. And the CO2 dissolves in the ocean to make you carbonic acid. So that's the kind of system. Please, anybody has a question?
Could you say a few words about the viability of in this scenario?
Sorry?
So could
You have to have a microphone, pal.
Could you say a few words about the viability in this scenario of solving some of the old problems of the RNA world, the difficulty in forming...
The RNA world, I mean, the RNA world is like saying, I am going to make a car, and it's 1860, and first of all, I'm going to have a computer. It's rather like saying to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, you know, what, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, let's make computers in 1940 instead of rockets. You have to have the rocket first. You've got to have the free energy first. Then you can get some information. Because information, as soon as you have something fairly... Look, this is a low entropy environment. We are living outside, relative to this, Sao Paulo is a high entropy environment. This is low entropy because of all the studies you've done, all your parents working hard for you, all the professors you're listening to. We've got ourselves into lower and lower entropy states, and now we're in a room all together. So this is a low entropy state. So that's why we hope we're going to have emerging ideas. But that, you know, but I'm not talking about RNA, you know, because most of my what am I doing right now is nothing to do with RNA and DNA, or not much anyway. It's the metabolism. So I would say, you know, yes, of course we have to make RNA, but it's not first. It takes time. You know, in the first cars and the first steam engines, you had to have governors. They were mechanical. You know, we need mechanical kind of information to start with, so to speak. For example, a pump. A pump is information. As long as it's operating all the time, it's information. So that's the way to think about it. It's not, you know, the DNA, I'm not denying it, but my responsibility is to say, look, you can't start with a computer. You really can't. You know, how did the computer start? It was weaving. Weaving was how the computer started. You know, the Jacquard loom was how the computer started. It was stolen property for the weavers that knew how to automate the looms.
Very good. But my question is the following. Do you think that this could emerge from one single rocket like that, and this would give origin to all? Or do you think that it would be necessary several independent units like that to really start the whole thing?
Well, of course, it's a great question, and there's always the possibility that there were two origins of life, or two emergences of life. Because, after all, bacteria and archaebacteria have different membranes. They have some of their reproduction mechanisms are different to each other. They're so extraordinarily different. Could it be that they came from different vents? I'm not sure about it, and of course it's an open question. But I don't think it came, I mean, basically, to put it crudely, we won. Okay, there were probably thousands and millions of trials, billions of trials, and we happened to be the one that survived. So, you know, the best way to think about Darwin's law is it's the law of natural oh, Jesus. It's the law. Have I gone off now? Am I still going? Yes. No complaints? It's the law of natural rejection. That's what we should always know. It's not it's not a good idea. You know, natural selection, it gets you into all kinds of political trouble to start with. And it's also, every student who's 18 thinks, or 19, they're going to make the world different because they're the best. I mean, Americans, they get a gold star. An American child gets a gold star for potty training, if you understand the term. You know, everybody thinks they're going to be just fantastic. But actually, let's get real. You know, suddenly we realize at the age of 18, the world's a tough place. It's hard work. We're walking this tightrope. And any time we could slip off. You know, it's the law of natural rejection. So what I think, to actually empathize with your point, I would say that the emergence of life had to be a cooperative. So, but I would say this particular cooperative kind of won, or something like this cooperative won, and it's unbroken for 4.4 billion years. So yes, there were probably hundreds to thousands of original cells, and they're all cooperating, even to start with. And if I have time, I'll show how I think that's likely to be. But I got an idea about how to do this yesterday, listening to Nora Nofka, and I think perhaps because the young people here, I want to emphasize how I like to think science really works. So can I just run through this very quickly? By the way, that's the textbook membrane. The membranes in any life is nothing like that. It's full of protein. There's hardly any lipid. I just want to emphasize that. There's the protein, there's the lipid, there's RNA and so forth. Ribonucleic acid. So Nora showed this picture yesterday. Sorry, am I going over time? Nora showed this picture yesterday. Now, I've always known about biofilms, microbialites. I mean, who doesn't these days? But she showed me this picture, and then she explained how she thought it all worked. And it's extra EPS. What is it? Out loud. Extra polymeric substances. So what do I do after Nora's lecture? Typically, I mean, this is typical the way a scientist works, is, wow, Jesus, I'm going to go to the Google Scholar, and I'm going to look all this stuff up. So what do I look up? I look up how this stuff works. And here's a very easy example of how it works, that the bacteria get together and they exude, they secrete, or their waste product, maybe, goes outside the cell and starts to bind to minerals and to each other. So suddenly they've got a cooperative, just rather like as you implied to start with. So here we've got a cooperative. Now, I think we know all about fractals and so forth, and how self-similar structures work in the universe, how the dunes in Sahara are... I'm going to leave it there. And yet I can look at sand with my children or grandchildren, and the waves are only this far, but I can't tell the difference unless I have a scale. So it's about scaling. So if this is a good scale for a biofilm, surely I can say, right, well, I mean, I didn't do this last night, by the way. We had this up our sleeves anyway. But now I've got a bit more of an excuse for saying it. Here's our green rust and McKenna-White, which is iron monosulfide, and they're all kind of getting together in an exuded amyloidal protein or peptide. So because I think that, and I haven't got time to show you, I think that you automatically get peptides, amyloidal peptides, the prions, the ones that give you Alzheimer's and so forth, you automatically get that from this kind of system. And it exuded, and maybe that becomes the first kind of material of the cells, which are all together. So there's thousands and thousands of green rust, billions and billions, and there's hundreds to hundreds of these, and some of them are not rejected. Some of them are not rejected. So I got this idea from listening to Nora. That's how science works. We're listening to the people we can trust, always keeping our eye on next door. So what am I keeping my eye on? I'm keeping my eye on things like electrochemistry, molecular orbital theory. I'm a geologist, but I've got to worry about what's happening next door, because we've done the initial conditions of life, I would argue. We know what they are. We know what was the problem. We know what the issues are. Now we've got to solve the next stages. And it's about the electrons, remember. But it's also about how you get communities and how they're going to automatically, actually part of the very excess of what you have. So, I mean, for example, I believe it's badgers or somebody will help me here. I mean, there's some organisms or some rats or something that they use their feces to kind of make a barrier against the outside world. It's always use the waste product if you can. Of course, that's one of the tricks that capitalism is trying to work out now. How can we use the waste product? So, sorry, that was a rather long answer. Any more questions? Or maybe I've finished. I don't know. You stop me when you want to.
How sure do you think you can be about the accuracy of these initial conditions in the ADN?
So as a geologist, I would say there is no problem whatsoever. Now, that sounds extraordinary, but we know what the meteorites are like. We know what they come, we know how we were made. We know that there's iron-nickel meteorites. We know there's chondrites. We know there are magnesium aluminosilicates and so forth. We know all that, and we know that as they collapse, they will eventually make an Earth very much like this. So, and there's one vital point here that geologists should tell the rest of the astrobiology community if they don't know it themselves anyway, and that is that you've got to have a particular size of a planet. So, for example, our planet is made basically, the near surface of our planet is olivine, magnesium, iron, silicate, okay? Most of it. And that's what turns into serpentinite, which becomes a little more oxidized from the iron and hydrated. But so basically, we know that's the mantle. We know that's probably the mantle of Mars. And nobody's going to argue with me, I don't think, about that. Where they will argue is, why have we got carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? Now, that is weird. I would argue that you've got to have carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, otherwise there'd be no point to having life. So you've got excess carbon dioxide. Why have you got excess carbon dioxide? You've got excess carbon dioxide because our planet is big enough so that the gravitational strength, the densities are reduced all the time as you go deeper and deeper into the crust. And on our planet, when you get to about 650 kilometers down, olivine is now extremely uncomfortable. And it's being squashed, and it wants to become a mineral called perovskite. Now, perovskite's got calcium and magnesium and titanium and oxygen, silica, and so forth. So that doesn't seem that much like olivine. So how does this work out? Because if you've got no alumina, where are you going to get your 3+ material from, your 3+ ions, to Al3+? How are you going to get, if there's no alumina, how are you going to do that? Well, how you do that is you squash the olivine, and eventually the iron gives in. It dissociates into Fe3+ and Fe0. The Fe0 tends to go to the core, and Fe3+ is now in the mantle, and therefore it's relatively oxidized. It's so oxidized, I mean, we think of it as reduced, but it's so oxidized that the stable state of carbon above 400 or 500 degrees centigrade is carbon dioxide. So it means all volcanoes on a planet this size will emit carbon dioxide. Now, we don't have to worry about the hydrogen and methane. That's going to happen. I mean, every planet's going to give you hydrogen and methane, and go to Titan for things like that. But you've got to have the electron acceptor, and the most complex, difficult one, the very happy molecule, is carbon dioxide. And that's what initiates an instantaneous life. So I don't think I would fight off, I mean, I don't know a lot of stuff, of course, but I would fight off anybody who would argue about that part. But you can try, of course. Yes, it's deterministic. I mean, it's deterministic, that's the point. Statistically deterministic.
Any questions?
See, that's the trouble with microphone. It kind of keeps people quiet because they don't have immediate access to a microphone. Come on, give me a question. There's no such thing as a stupid question, says Einstein. Only stupid answers.
Thank you very much. Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to know, please, how do you put your ideas and couple with the heavy bombardment event? During the Hagia...
There probably was no heavier bombardment. It's a myth.
Really?
Yes. So there was a bombardment. It was pretty continuous, but there was a beautiful paper, I think it was 2009, maybe 2013, by Moiges and I've forgotten his other name, begins with A. Somebody can help me. Basically, they show even if you had a heavy bombardment, then it doesn't make much difference to the temperature of the sediments, because the thermal conductivity of a wet sediment is so very low that the thermal wave wouldn't be able to kill off the deep biosphere at any time. You can have a heavy bombardment if you like, but of course they were pretty tough bombardments. If it'd been big bombardment, we wouldn't be here. So we know that there was always just a bit less. And I don't think anything would have killed. I mean, try weeding your garden or get rid of the mice. Whatever you do, it's very hard, or the child's nits in the hair. It's very hard to get rid of life once it gets started, because it's a going concern. So I have no worry about the heavy bombardment.
Thank you.
It's rather a personal view, by the way.
Any more questions?
You're letting me get away with it.
Okay.
Where do you happen to position yourself in this old debate? What came first, metabolism or cold?
Metabolism.
Metabolism.
Yes, of course.
So you are siding in with, say, Freeman Dyson, for example.
Sorry?
You are siding in with Freeman Dyson, for example, who posits that metabolism
No,
must
I'm
be the
not
starting
siding
point.
with Freeman Dyson. I
You're
think
not.
his books are now absolutely outdated. And the idea of having two origins of life, one with the code and one with metabolism, was nuts. So no, I am not a Freeman Dyson supporter for lots of different reasons, but definitely not. We automatically, any system that is far from equilibrium has information in it. Automatically, you know, the information in the cyclone. You know, it's not a coded information, but it's information. The molecules in the cyclone know what to do next. They can't help it. Okay, they're pulled in. So that's information. And information gets more and more subtle, of course. And, you know, and it's a whole other kind of course to talk about the origin of information at the coding level. But I'll just say something about this mineral green rust, which is, I'm sorry I never got around to showing you this. But here's, in green rust, basically you're looking at layered mineral. There's ferric iron and ferrous iron and red and green, okay? But some of those greens could be magnesium. Okay? Now the magnesium doesn't change into redox state, so the magnesium is there. If you oxidize white rust to green rust and then keep oxidizing it, the magnesium always stays in the same place. And then you reduce it, it stays in the same place. It's kind of information. I mean, it's not terrific, not that helpful, but it means that the system has a memory right there, in spite of the redox changes round about it. So, you know, this is a very kind of humble way of thinking about the code, but I think that's, you know, the RNA world is not humble. You know, they are very pleased with themselves and they never worry about the initial conditions. They never worry about where the million electrons a second come from for the billions of RNAs and DNAs they've got to deal with. So, you know, I'm fiercely opposed to the RNA world as an origin of life. It's, you know, you can call that an origin of life because it would be an origin of life, but life emerged. It does it in very small steps. You know, I said yesterday, somebody showed me the aeroplane from Brazil that first got to Paris, I understand, and that was about 120 years ago, or 130 years ago. And now we've got jet engines to go to Paris. But if you actually follow an aeronautical engineer, they were very, very small steps. And every now and then, as we know, unfortunately, one of them was rejected because it's the law of natural rejection. Mostly everything gets rejected. Only very few survivors.
Michael, posso fazer uma pergunta? I would like to ask something. When I entered the chemistry university, I had like a lesson about this, and I was could you talk about the coacervate hypothesis and
The what?
Coacervate? I remember they calling it coacervado.
Look, I can talk about it, but I want to talk about it my way. Okay?
All right, in the prebiotic soup.
In 1867, I think, or 77, Karl Marx wrote a letter to one of his friends, you know, about what was happening in the markets and so on. But his first paragraph was about the emergence of life in this letter. I could send it to you if you like. It's an incredible letter. Marx, whatever we think of him, whatever, he was a Victorian intellectual. You know, he was keeping up with the science all the time. And what he knew were people like Pfeffer and Traub in the 1880s were making membranes of inorganic material and suggesting life started that way. This was picked up by people like Leduc and Mayakovsky. So the whole consideration of before the First World War was that life started inorganically. The opposition was Pasteur's acolytes. Now Pasteur, as you know, said you cannot have spontaneous origin. But he was talking about organics. And even Pasteur changed his mind. But the terrible, awful psychological thing that happened was that the people who took over, all the acolytes, all the research students of Pasteur were adamant that you could not have spontaneous generation. So anybody who talked about spontaneous generation from inorganic molecules was laughable. In fact, the first great book on the mechanism, notice the title, The Mechanism of Life, was by Leduc. And he had to publish in English because they wouldn't let him publish in French because they thought it was nonsense. That book is still a beautiful, beautiful book to read. It's called The Mechanism of Life by Leduc. Then came this devastating First World War, which killed off a huge amount of intellectual science, killed a lot of German science off. What did it leave? It left basically a kind of, you could call it a Marxist-Leninism, I guess. And Marxist-Leninism then became the structure of scientific socialism. So we're going to be scientists now, and we're all on the left, so let's think about how we can start life. Well, it has to be egalitarian. So let's have organic molecules raining from space and making little coacevates, little organic pods, and let's have UV radiation come down and turn that material into life. And that's great. And Stalin thought it was wonderful, and they gave him the prize. And Oparin, who, by the way, is the author of this work in 1922 originally, was the supporter of Lysenko, who led to 20 million deaths of starvation, because he said that Lysenko said you could take the... What's everybody talking about? I'm sorry, I'm going to talk about this, because we've realized the political influence in psychology on how we think, and we've got to think for ourselves. So what happened was the Ukrainians, of course, had lots of wheat fields, so Lysenko said, well, let's just take the wheat from the wheat fields and put it in Siberia, but make it cold first so it gets used to the climate, and then we can grow Ukrainian wheat in Siberia. And then, of course, we can put the Ukrainians there as well. That makes real good sense. No, this coacevate hypothesis is absolutely appalling hypothesis. It's got nothing to say for itself. And it was taken to Southern California, and they picked up on it, for goodness sake, because Miller had made amino acids from methane, ammonia, and sulfuric acid. Well, of course, all that told us was that it was easy to make amino acids. But we're suffering from those experiments and those ideas to this day. They are ludicrous. I want to say it, they're just silly. They're not worth arguing, as I haven't, I admit. I don't mind arguing about all kinds of things, but not about that. They were politically motivated ideas. And I don't want the Stalin Prize, and I certainly don't want the Oparin Prize.
Okay, thanks. I would like if you could send me the text you talked about.
Sure.
Marx.
Sure. It's delightful.
Any more questions? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. Please.